Space, as it turns out, isn't the final frontier. Understanding other species is. And boy, does the rest of the galaxy struggle to understand humans. The Galactic Confederation had catalogued approximately 4,219 sentient species across 12 spiral arms. And still, not a single xenobiologist could adequately explain why Homo sapiens did, well, anything that they did. Evolutionary anomalies, the Zenthari called them. Biochemical curiosities, said the methane-breathing Voloks. Complete lunatics, muttered everyone else, when diplomatic channels were safely muted. When humans joined the interstellar community, the other species had certain expectations. After all, Earth was classified as a death world. A charming categorization for planets with environmental conditions so hostile that evolving there required either exceptional luck or exceptional stubborn resilience. Most Death World species were, appropriately, aggressive, territorial, and possessed a healthy respect for apex predators. Humans, however, missed that particular memo. "I'm telling you, Zentrell, they're at it again," Science Officer Mavlok said, her compound eyes dilating with what her species considered exasperation. The monitoring station orbiting the colony world of Proxima Centauri 3 buzzed with activity as various technicians and officers grouped around a holographic display. Jinthrap, a towering Anubian with obsidian scales and more academic degrees than most species had appendages, leaned forward. His elongated snout wrinkled in disbelief. "That can't possibly be right." "Recalibrate the sensors," he ordered, not taking his 4 eyes off the display. No sentient being would approach a Nexus beast voluntarily, let alone... He stopped, his jaw hanging open in a rare display of genuine shock. "I told you," Mavlok clicked in a tone that universal translators always rendered as insufferably smug. "And the sensors are working perfectly." The display showed a human male, later identified as Kai Reynolds, xenobiological field researcher and, apparently, possessor of either a death wish or the galaxy's most overdeveloped hero complex, approaching a wounded Nexus beast. For those unfamiliar with the xenobiological catalogue of terrifying things to avoid at all costs, a Nexus beast ranks somewhere between active supernova and tax audit by the Galactic Revenue Service. Standing approximately 3 meters tall when on all 6 limbs, covered in iridescent armor plating that could deflect most standard-issue weapons, and equipped with both venomous fangs and retractable bone blades along its spine, the species had earned the classification of Apex Plus predator. Apex Plus was bureaucratic shorthand, for even the apex predators run away from this thing. Yet, there was Reynolds, a fragile bag of mostly water and questionable decision-making skills, approaching one with what appeared to be a medical kit. And was that a ration pack? "Is he feeding it?" asked Junior Officer Tech Parler, his tentacles writhing in agitation. "Worse," Zentrell said faintly. "He's talking to it." The monitoring station fell silent as they watched Reynolds kneel beside the wounded beast. One of its legs was clearly broken, purple ichor seeping from between armor plates. The beast's primary maw, it had 3, opened to reveal rows of serrated teeth, each the length of a human forearm. Reynolds, displaying the famous human disregard for personal safety that had both impressed and horrified the galactic community, simply made a soothing noise and offered what appeared to be a protein bar. "Someone dispatch a retrieval team," Zintrana ordered, already mentally composing the incident report that would surely mark the end of his career. "We'll need to recover the body before the local scavengers." "Sir," interrupted Mavlok, "the beast is eating from his hand." "Well, yes," Zintrell replied impatiently. "I imagine it would start with the extremities before—" "No, sir, it's eating the food, not the hand, not even attempting to eat the hand. It's purring." The inhabitants of the monitoring station collectively performed the various species-specific equivalents of a double-take. Nexus beasts did not purr. They roared, they hissed, they emitted ultrasonic hunting calls that paralyzed prey with fear. But purring, that was new. "Begin recording," Zintrell ordered. "Every sensor, every frequency. I want quantum-level detail." The Xenobiological Council is never going to believe this without extensive documentation. As Reynolds gently applied some kind of salve to the beast's wounded leg, the creature made a sound somewhere between a contented rumble and a garbage disposal processing titanium cutlery. "Humans," Mevlok said with what might have been admiration or existential dread, "are not right in the head." Over the following weeks, the entire scientific community of Proxima Centauri 3 found themselves unwillingly invested in what they dubbed the Reynolds situation. Observation posts were established at safe distances, and multiple research grants were hastily approved to study what many considered a genuine scientific marvel. A human who hadn't been eaten by a Nexus beast, despite doing absolutely everything to encourage that outcome. Reynolds, meanwhile, seemed entirely unaware that he'd become the galaxy's most watched reality show. He'd constructed a makeshift shelter near the injured beast's territory and visited daily, bringing food, medical supplies, and, most bizarre of all, toys. "Is that a ball?" asked Dr. Hezek, tentacles twitching in disbelief as they watched Reynolds roll a large sphere toward the recovering predator. "Technically, it's a reinforced Duraplast exercise orb," Zintral corrected, not taking his eyes off the monitor. "Designed for Jovian whale rehabilitation. He's playing fetch with a Nexus beast," Hezek said flatly. "With a ball." The Nexus beast, its injured leg now splintered with some ingenious combination of local wood and synthetic fibers, batted the ball back toward Reynolds with surprising gentleness for a creature that could disembowel a combat mech. "Do we have any research on whether Nexus beasts experience fun?" Mevlok asked hesitantly. "That question wasn't exactly at the top of the research priority list," Zintral replied dryly, given that most field researchers who encountered Nexus beasts were too busy being digested to conduct proper observational studies. As days turned to weeks, the beast, which Reynolds had apparently named Fuzzball, in a demonstration of either extreme bravery or terminal irony, began to recover. Its wounds healed, and it regained strength. The entire scientific community held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable moment when the predator would return to its natural state and Reynolds would become an unfortunate statistic. Except that moment never came. "He's brushing its teeth," Tekpala announced one morning, his voice pitched higher than usual. "The human is voluntarily putting his hands inside a Nexus beast's mouth to clean its teeth, with what appears to be a modified industrial scrubbing tool," Mevlok added, checking the sensor readings. "And the beast is allowing it?" "Perhaps it's a symbiotic relationship," suggested a newly arrived xenobiologist. "Many species form unexpected bonds for mutual benefit." "What possible benefit could a human provide to one of the most efficient killing machines in the galaxy?" Zintrala asked. "Entertainment," someone suggested. "Dental hygiene, apparently," Mevlok responded dryly. The situation took an unexpected turn when Reynolds received a visitor, another human from the nearby settlement, identified as Dr. Lin, a planetary geologist. The research team watched with alarm as Lin approached the camp where Reynolds was engaged in what could only be described as giving a belly rub to a creature that had previously been responsible for evacuating 3 mining operations. "Should we warn her?" Hezek asked nervously. "The warning system was activated the moment she entered the territorial range," Jintral replied. "She chose to ignore it." "More evidence that humans are collectively insane," Mevala muttered. Through the surveillance equipment they observed Lin's approach. She walked confidently, another perplexing human trait when approaching certain death, carrying what appeared to be a container of food. "Is she bringing offerings to appease the beast?" asked a junior researcher. "No," Jintral said, checking the chemical analysis. "That appears to be ice cream? A human dessert consisting primarily of frozen dairy products and sugar. She's bringing treats for a Nexus beast," Mevlok stated in disbelief. "We're witnessing the beginning of domestication efforts for the most dangerous predator in 3 sectors." "Impossible," Zintral dismissed. "Nexus beasts are genetically hardwired for solitary predation. Their limbic systems aren't capable of forming attachments beyond temporary mating pairs." Yet as they watched, Fuzzball bounded over to Lin with all the menace of an enthusiastic puppy, accepting the frozen treat with surprising delicacy from her outstretched hand. "I believe," Hezek said slowly, "that we may need to revise some of our fundamental assumptions about both species involved in this interaction." The real crisis began 3 weeks later, when sensors detected a pod of Nexus beasts approaching Reynolds' camp. A pod. Multiple Nexus beasts traveling together. A behavior never before documented and previously considered biologically impossible, given their territorial nature. "Evacuation protocols," Zintral barked. "Alert the human settlements. Deploy defense systems." "Sir," Mevlok interrupted. "Look at the footage." On the screen, Fuzzball had positioned itself between the approaching pod and Reynolds, its bone spines fully extended in a threat display. The standoff lasted nearly 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which every researcher present aged several years from stress. Then, incredibly, Fuzzball and the pod began a complex series of movements that the xenobiologists would later classify as a ritualistic greeting. "It's introducing them," Mevlok whispered. "The domesticated beast is introducing its human to its family, pack." "Impossible," Zintari repeated, though with considerably less conviction than before. Reynolds, displaying the characteristic human ability to take extraordinarily dangerous situations in stride, simply stood there as 7 full-grown Nexus beasts circled him, sniffing and making those strange purring sounds. Then he pulled out more protein bars. "He came prepared with snacks," Sakpala noted, voice faint with disbelief. "He anticipated this. Or he just always carries protein bars," Melok suggested. "Humans have bizarre eating schedules." Within an hour, Reynolds was surrounded by lounging Nexus beasts, all seemingly content to be in proximity to a creature that should, by all biological logic, have been considered prey. The research station's communications system nearly crashed from the volume of outgoing messages to various scientific bodies, governmental agencies, and several religious organizations that were reconsidering their cosmological frameworks in light of this development. 3 days later, a delegation from the Galactic Confederation arrived to witness the phenomenon personally. Led by High Administrator Vox Dume, a dignified Arcturian whose species had evolved from methodical pack hunters, the delegation approached Reynolds' camp with considerably more caution than the human had shown. "Greetings," Reynolds called cheerfully when he spotted them, surrounded by no fewer than 9 Nexus beasts in various states of repose. "You must be the science folks Mevlok mentioned. Come on over. They won't bite." This statement, given the dental capacity of the creatures in question, did little to inspire confidence. "Researcher Reynolds," Vox Dume began, formally, maintaining what he considered a safe distance, approximately twice the known leaping range of a Nexus beast. "We have been observing your interaction with these predators with great interest." "Yeah, the observation posts aren't exactly subtle," Reynolds replied with a grin, scratching behind what appeared to be a Nexus beast's auditory sensor. The creature's rear leg thumped rhythmically against the ground. "But I figured you were just doing your job." "May I inquire," Vox Dume asked delicately, "how you have avoided being devoured?" Reynolds laughed. "They're not mindless killing machines, you know. They're actually quite intelligent. Fuzzball here was just injured and scared when I found him. Once he realized I was trying to help, we established trust." The delegation exchanged glances that universally translated as, "This human is delusional." "But their neurological structure," began a Zentari neurobiologist, "is remarkably adaptive," Reynolds interrupted. "Your research is based on limited observation of stressed individuals in unfamiliar environments. In their natural social structure, they're quite sophisticated." "Social structure?" Zintral repeated incredulously. "Nexus beasts are solitary apex predators. Only when resources are scarce," Reynog countered, gesturing to the lounging pod. "In abundant environments they form complex family groups. The aggression you've documented is defensive, not inherent." As if to emphasize this point, a juvenile Nexus beast, a concept that sent several security officers reaching for weapons, bounded into the clearing and pounced playfully on Reynolds. The human, instead of being torn to shreds, simply laughed and engaged in what could only be described as roughhousing with a creature that could bite through starship hull plating. "Remarkable," whispered Vox Dume. "And you believe this relationship could be replicated?" Reynolds shrugged, gently pushing the juvenile off his chest. "Probably not easily. I spent weeks earning Fuzzball's trust, and I have certain advantages other researchers might lack." "Such as," prompted Zintral, "a complete disregard for safety protocols," Mevlok muttered just loudly enough to be heard. Reynolds grinned. "I was going to say patience and respect, but that too. Also, they seem to like the way humans smell. Something about our pheromones reminds them of a non-threatening species from their home world." "You discovered this how?" asked a fascinated xenochemist. "Trial and error, mostly," Reynolds admitted, emphasis on the error part at first. The implications of Reynolds' discovery spread rapidly through the scientific community and beyond. If Nexus beasts, long considered the embodiment of mindless aggression, could form social bonds not only with their own kind, but with entirely different species, What other fundamental truths about galactic life were simply misconceptions born of fear and limited observation? More importantly for many governments, if humans could pacify Nexus beasts, what other supposedly impossible feats might they casually accomplish, while the rest of the galaxy wasn't looking? Within months, the Reynolds method of predator rehabilitation became both a scientific discipline and something of a philosophical movement. Other humans, displaying that species' characteristic blend of courage and questionable self-preservation instincts, began applying similar approaches to other feared predator species. Not all attempts were successful. The incident with the void mantis of Rigel 7 would later be referred to as the Tuesday we don't talk about. But enough progress was made to revolutionize interspecies relations across the Confederation. 6 standard months after the initial observation, the monitoring station received an unexpected visitor. Reynolds arrived with Fuzzball trotting obediently at his side. The massive predator, now sporting what appeared to be a decorated collar, embedded with tracking and communication technology. The station's security systems activated automatically at the Nexus beast's presence, force fields humming to life. "Oh, turn those off," Reynolds said casually. "Fuzzball gets nervous around energy fields. Besides, he's here on official business." "Official business?" Sintral repeated carefully. Reynolds nodded, scratching the beast's armor-plated head. "The Confederation Xenobiological Council approved my proposal. Fuzzball is the first of his species to be registered as a wildlife ambassador. We'll be touring research facilities to help correct misconceptions about predator species." Mevlok's compound eyes blinked rapidly in succession. "You're taking a Nexus beast on a tour of densely populated research stations?" "Yep," Reynolds replied cheerfully. "Don't worry, he's very well behaved, only eats when I tell him to." The absolute silence that followed this statement was broken only by the sound of Dukpala fainting. "That was a joke," Reynolds clarified, his grin suggesting it was only partially a joke. "Look, I brought his favorite toy as a peace offering." He produced a Duraplast ball that now bore the marks of extremely powerful jaws. "He wanted to thank you all for the medical supplies you sent over." "We didn't send," Zentroy began before being silenced by Mevlok's elbow in his side. "Of course we did," she said smoothly. "Standard research protocol to provide support for field operations." Reynolds winked at her. "Right, well, Fuzzball appreciated it, didn't you, boy?" The Nexus beast made a sound that caused several pieces of sensitive equipment to vibrate alarmingly. "Means he's happy," Reynolds translated unnecessarily. As the human and his improbable companion toured the facility, leaving behind a trail of astonished researchers and several requests for transfers to less exciting posts, Zintral and Mevlok watched from the relative safety of the command center. "You realize what this means?" Mevlok said quietly. "If they can do this with Nexus beasts—" "I know," Zandra replied. "The implications are unsettling." "Unsettling? Humans just casually upended centuries of xenobiological doctrine because one of them decided to bandage a predator instead of running away." Through the surveillance feed they watched as Reynolds introduced Fuzzball to the station's cafeteria staff, who were torn between professional courtesy and the biological imperative to flee. "Do you think they'll all start keeping apex predators as pets now?" Mevlok asked. Sintral sighed heavily. "I wouldn't be surprised. Humans have a documented history of this behavior, even on their homeworld. Something they call domestication. But there's a difference between the small canines they keep in their dwellings and a Nexus beast." "A difference in scale, perhaps, but not in principle," Zintral replied thoughtfully. "Perhaps this is why humans adapted so well to galactic society despite evolving on a death world. They don't see threats the way other species do. Where we see danger, they see potential friendship." "That's either the most enlightened or most foolish approach to survival I've ever heard," Locke said. Later that evening, as Reynolds prepared to depart with his unlikely companion, he left behind a data crystal containing his research notes on Nexus beast behavior, social structures, and, most bizarrely, preferred snack foods. "The key is respect," he told the assembled researchers. "They can sense fear, but they can also sense genuine goodwill. Treat them like thinking, feeling beings rather than monsters, and you'd be surprised what can happen." As the human and beast departed, heading toward a specially modified shuttle, Zintral found himself contemplating the wider implications. "We've been approaching the galaxy all wrong," he said quietly to Mevlok. "We categorize, we analyze risks, we establish safe distances and protocols. Humans just reach out, and occasionally get their arms bitten off, Mevlok added dryly. Less often than one might expect, Zintral countered. Perhaps there's something to their method after all. 3 standard years later, the Galactic Confederation officially reclassified 17 previously designated hostile apex predator species to potentially cooperative sophonts, thanks largely to the Reynolds Initiative for Predator Relations. Guided interaction protocols were established, and specialist human teams began training representatives from various species in safe engagement techniques. The monitoring station, now expanded into the Proxima Centauri Xenobiological Research Center, continued its work under Zintral's leadership. Their most popular attraction was the monthly visit from Reynolds and Fuzzball, who had become something of a celebrity duo across several sectors. "I've been thinking," Mevlok said during one such visit, watching as a group of nervous but excited xenobiology students cautiously offered treats to the now docile Nexus beast. "Perhaps we should reconsider our classification of Earth." "Oh," Zentran prompted, already suspecting where this was going. "Yes. We classified it as a death world based on its hostile environmental conditions and predator population. Classification remains accurate," Zenthor pointed out. "Earth's biodiversity includes an unusually high percentage of venomous, toxic, and predatory species." "True," Mevlok conceded. "But we failed to consider an important factor, which is, on most death worlds, the environment shapes species into becoming more aggressive, more territorially defensive, more focused on immediate survival," Mevlok explained. "But humans went in the opposite direction. They developed cooperation, empathy, and the bizarre tendency to approach dangerous things with curiosity rather than caution." "Your point being, perhaps Earth isn't a death world at all," Mevlok said, watching as Reynolds demonstrated how to properly scratch a Nexus beast's armored chin without losing fingers. "Perhaps it's something we don't have a classification for yet. A world so dangerous that the only way to survive was to befriend the danger." Zintral considered this. "A friendship world," he suggested with uncharacteristic whimsy. "Something like that," Mevlok agreed. "Though I suspect friendship is a simplistic term for what humans do. It's more like they refuse to acknowledge that something wants to eat them until they've convinced it otherwise." Across the observation room, Fuzzball had rolled onto his armored back, 6 deadly limbs splayed in the air, as Reynolds demonstrated the optimal belly-rubbing technique to the astonished students. "The galaxy was not prepared for humans," Zintral said with what might have been a chuckle. "No," Mevlok agreed. "But perhaps that's exactly what the galaxy needed." As if to punctuate this philosophical observation, Fuzzball made that peculiar purring sound that had once sent entire settlements into panic evacuations. Now it merely prompted a round of cautious but genuine cooing from the assembled students. In the grand scheme of cosmic evolution, the ability to turn apex predators into oversized pets might not seem like a particularly useful survival trait. But as representatives from 12 species carefully took turns offering treats to a creature their ancestors would have fled from on sight, it became clear that humanity's greatest strength might not be their intelligence, their adaptability, or even their bizarre biochemistry. Perhaps it was simply their inability to recognize when something should, by all logical standards, be impossible, paired with their stubborn insistence on trying anyway. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Confederation's Xenobiological Classification Division, a new footnote was added to the official entry for Homo sapiens. Caution: may spontaneously befriend local predators. Approach with treats. 6 standard months after the establishment of the Proxima Centauri Xenobiological Research Center, an incident occurred that further cemented humanity's bizarre reputation throughout the Confederation. A commercial transport vessel carrying exotic goods from the Orion sector suffered catastrophic engine failure and crash-landed in what was now known as the Nexus territory, a sprawling region where Reynolds' original pod had expanded to include no fewer than 37 Nexus beasts, living in complex social groups. Standard emergency protocols dictated immediate evacuation of the surviving crew, followed by a controlled demolition of the wreckage to prevent territorial disputes. Nexus beasts were known to be attracted to new objects in their territory, and a crashed ship certainly qualified, except the ship's captain, a human named Malik Torres, had other ideas. "What do you mean, he refused evacuation?" Zintran demanded, staring at the emergency response coordinator with all four eyes wide in disbelief. "Exactly that, sir," the coordinator replied, mandibles clicking nervously. When the rescue shuttle arrived, Captain Torres thanked them for the offer but said, and I quote, "I've got this handled." "Handled," Murlock repeated. "There are 37 apex predators converging on his position." 38 now, the coordinator corrected, checking the scanner. Another just joined from the eastern ridge. The monitoring station's screens showed the crashed vessel, its hull breached in multiple places, surrounded by a steadily increasing number of Nexus beasts. They weren't attacking yet, but were circling with obvious curiosity, bone spines extended in what might have been threat displays or simply communication among themselves. Torres, apparently unconcerned by imminent dismemberment, had emerged from the ship carrying a musical instrument. "Is that a guitar?" Kapala asked, having finally been promoted to senior researcher despite his unfortunate tendency to faint during high-stress situations. "Technically a ukulele," Mevlock corrected absently. "A small stringed instrument from Earth's Pacific Island cultures is going to defend himself against Nexus beasts with a musical instrument." Sintral's tone suggested he was reconsidering humans' reputation for intelligence. "I don't think defense is his plan," Mevlock said slowly as Torres seated himself on a piece of debris and began to play. The sound quality from the monitoring equipment wasn't ideal, but they could clearly hear the cheerful, rhythmic music emanating from the tiny instrument. Torres was singing something about island life and taking it easy, concepts that seemed wildly inappropriate given his current predicament. The truly astonishing part wasn't Torrens' lack of survival instinct, however. It was the Nexus beasts' reaction. They had stopped circling. Several had actually sat down, their predatory focus shifting from potential threat assessment to what looked suspiciously like enjoyment. "They're listening to the music," Tanquillar whispered, as if afraid his voice might disrupt this impossible tableau. "That's not possible," Zenthrat insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Their auditory processing is designed for hunting frequencies, not musical appreciation." Yet the evidence was undeniable. As Torres continued playing, the Nexus beasts settled around him in what could only be described as an audience. One particularly bold specimen even approached to within a few meters, its massive head tilting in the universal gesture of curiosity. "Should we dispatch a security team?" someone asked, "and interrupt what might be the most important xenobiological observation of the decade?" Mevlock responded incredulously. "Absolutely not. Increase monitoring resolution. I want to hear every note and record every reaction." For nearly an hour, Torres played his impromptu concert for the most dangerous audience in the quadrant. When he finally finished, the gathered beasts remained calm, some even making that distinctive purring sound that had once been considered mythological. Torres stood, bowed theatrically, and then, to the collective gasp of every researcher watching, approached the nearest beast and extended his hand, palm up, in a gesture reminiscent of Reynolds' initial contact. "He's read the Reynolds papers," Mevlock realized. "He's attempting to establish trust without any training or preparation," Zensho added, unable to tear his eyes from the display. "Someone contact Reynolds immediately." But before Reynolds could be reached, the nearest Nexus beast had already made its decision. It extended its primary sensory appendage, a feathered, antenna-like structure that emerged from its armored head, and gently touched Torres's outstretched palm. "Contact established," Tekupala announced unnecessarily, his voice higher than usual with excitement. Torres, emboldened by this success, proceeded to calmly explain to the Nexus beasts, as if they were fellow passengers on a delayed transport, that his ship contained perishable goods that needed to be salvaged, and would they mind terribly if he and his crew went about that business. The truly mind-boggling part was that the beasts seemed to understand, or at least accept, this arrangement. They maintained a respectful distance as Torres signaled the rescue shuttle to return, explaining that the situation was under control and salvage operations could proceed. "He's using them as security," Sinclair realized with dawning comprehension. "The most effective deterrent against cargo thieves in the quadrant." "Humans," Mavok said with that mixture of exasperation and admiration that had become the standard response to humanity's exploits, "will befriend anything." By the time Reynolds arrived, accompanied by Fuzzball, who was now sporting a custom environmental suit that allowed him to comfortably visit space stations, Torres had not only salvaged his cargo, but had established what he called a working relationship with the local Nexus beast pod. It's not really that complicated, Torres explained to the assembled researchers, seeming genuinely puzzled by their amazement. They're intelligent, they're curious, and they appreciate good music. Reminded me of this bar I used to play at in New Mumbai. Tough crowd, but loyal, once you won them over. You're comparing apex predators to bar patrons? Zintral asked faintly. Torres shrugged. Same principles apply. Respect their space, provide something of value, don't act like prey. Works with most beings, sentient or otherwise. Reynolds, who had been watching this exchange with evident amusement, finally spoke up. I told you, Zintral, the key is treating them like thinking beings, not mindless killing machines. But the statistical probability, Zintral began. Statistics don't account for genuine connection, Reynolds interrupted gently. That's what humans understand intuitively and what the rest of the galaxy is slowly learning. As if to emphasize this point, Fuzzball made a graceful gesture with his primary hunting limbs, a gesture that Torres' new Nexus beast acquaintances mirrored with surprising synchronization. They're communicating, Mevlok breathed. A formal greeting ritual we've never observed before. They've always done this, Reynolds corrected. We just weren't paying attention the right way. The incident became known throughout the Confederation as the ukulele diplomacy, and Torres found himself reluctantly drafted into the rapidly expanding Reynolds Initiative. Countless researchers began studying human-predator interactions, trying to isolate the specific qualities that made humans uniquely suited for this improbable role. Was it their biochemistry, their evolutionary history, some subtle pheromone or behavioral cue that signaled friend, not food, to creatures that had evolved to see everything as potential prey? The most compelling theory, proposed by Zintrell in his groundbreaking paper, Predatory Empathy, the Human Paradox, suggested something both simpler and more profound. Humans, having evolved on a world where they were neither the strongest nor the fastest, developed an extraordinary capacity for understanding other creatures' perspectives, even those trying to eat them. This empathy, coupled with their inexplicable optimism that nearly any creature could become a friend with sufficient patience, created what Zintral termed the domestication perspective, the uniquely human ability to look at a terrifying predator and see a potential companion. As the Galactic Confederation adjusted to this new paradigm, and the increasingly common sight of humans with various rehabilitated predator species accompanying them on their travels, a new saying began to circulate among spacefaring species. There are three constants in the universe: entropy increases, light has a maximum speed, and if you wait long enough, a human will befriend it. The galaxy, it seemed, would never be the same. And somewhere on Proxima Centauri 3, a Nexus beast named Fuzzball purred contentedly as his human scratched that perfect spot behind his armored crest. Both of them blissfully unconcerned about the fundamental laws of nature they had so casually defied. After all, what was a little interspecies impossibility between friends?